I think we've gotten really caught up in thinking we can think what we need. I think your body is going to be the one that's really going to guide you towards health and beauty and truth and all of these things. Surrounding yourself with stuff that actually makes you feel good and not stuff that is either superficial and just kind of looks good or somebody else has told you is what you're supposed to have. Evolution isn't pointing us towards what's real. It's pointing us towards what's useful. You start to realize that evolution is actually, even though we classically have called it dumb and blind, is actually a very intelligent system because it's just a feedback loop between every biological agent on the planet. We think of our brains as hard drives, and that's not good when it comes to memories because we actually generate memories. If you remember something, you're actually remembering the last time you remembered it.
Wait, what?
So the idea is...
Hey everyone, welcome back to Spirit Unfolding, the place where we explore the depth of the human experience and the creative energy that runs through us all and what we can do to create a more beautiful world. And my guest today is really connected to that idea of beauty, as the first thing that I saw of him a couple of weeks ago through Instagram really captivated me. He's an artist, a thinker. His name is Andrew Slechten, and sorry for pronouncing that badly. Andrew, thanks very much for being here, man. I'm really excited to dive in.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited.
Yeah, man. The thing that really caught my attention was something you said in one of these short videos you have on your Instagram profile. Humans are attracted to beauty in the same way trees are attracted to light. And it was such an interesting thing to me because beauty feels like something that is, we can kind of feel it and kind of sense it, but it's really hard to sort of quantify or to sort of, know what it is. Because I kind of want, but I feel like you've done a lot more thinking about this and exploration of this whole concept of beauty and also connecting it to art and nature and consciousness perhaps. So I just kind of want to start there. Like, what is beauty and why is it important?
Okay, starting with the easy stuff, right? So the way I think about beauty is basically could be summarized as like alignment with the environment. So sort of a harmonic or a syncretism with the world around you, that really it's really a truth. I don't know if this is the right way to say it, but it's kind of a position of truth to the world. It's interacting with what's real, because I think a lot of what we end up interacting with in the day to day isn't actually real. It's just useful. The idea being like, if you pick up a pen, you're not spending a lot of time thinking about the details of that pen and what makes that singular object singular. You're treating it as the symbol pen because there's a function to that and you'll be able to write the note that you're trying to write. So to really be existing with the world as it is, you have to start dropping a lot of those symbols. And I think that's when beauty starts to really show up.
Yeah. It's interesting, like this usefulness feels like something that obviously since maybe the dawn of the industrial age or even before that, something that we've leaned into more and more as a society. But while doing that, I feel like we've lost our touch with beauty. And I know that you as an artist and you're working with on lots of different techniques and materials from what I've seen, you have a really hands-on experience with beauty and with creating beauty and with perhaps creating your own unique identification with beauty or experience with beauty. Can you elaborate like how that process is for you and why that is important as well for yeah, just everyone, I suppose, because it becomes easier and easier to go into this direction of only usefulness, or perhaps the beauty or the prettiness that we get presented with, instead of really finding out ourselves a connection with beauty and with the world.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I mean, so one level of it is beauty, as I'm talking about it, isn't an objective state of the world. It's not a static description of something. It's very interactive. It's very subjective. It's really about where you are in this moment compared to the environment around you. Um, and to tie that into usefulness, it's actually, I mean, that would imply that it would be like like maybe the most useful thing, right? If it's really drawing you towards what's actually real in this moment. But there's something about sort of a practical position in the world that can sacrifice a lot of that. And kind of the way I think about it is I trained to be an architect for a while, and one of the like interesting things about, or what I would say one of the mistakes that kind of the modern building system lets us do is we can come to a piece of land and we can just apply existing systems to it without having to actually pay attention to the reality of that space. And you don't like, I mean, if you think about, we'll go all the way back to if you were just trying to build a shelter, kind of Stone Age shelter, you have to be really intentional about what the space is, the whatever materials you can find. You're really building a very singular thing. Versus now we have dimensional lumber and a lot of plug and play systems that really just let us design a house in a vacuum and then place it on a piece of land. And so there's a disconnect there, right? Like,
Yeah, and we adjust the land instead of work with the land.
yes,
We just like, oh, we don't want this part of that hill there because we want that house there, and we just move the hill instead of
right.
working with the nature and with the shapes that are already there. It's funny, by the way, just a couple of weeks ago, I had an episode with a friend of mine that did a year course going back to the Stone Age,
Oh,
actually working like that. So
fun.
love the
Yeah,
synchronicity here.
yeah. Um, yeah, I think I've run out of steam. I don't,
Yeah, so like this, um like I'm interested, like for you as an artist, like why do you believe it's like why is it so important in a sense? Okay, we need to like connect more, and like what is that, how does that then actually look
mm-hmm.
like, and how do we make sure that in, let's say, the next generations or the next decades, we go back to working with beauty again, with that's already there?
Right. Yeah, it really just comes down to making things yourself. Um, and I have the inclination that I joke that I like to rebuild, or I redesign the wheel constantly. Like any opportunity I'm given to work on a project, I'm starting from first principles. I'm I'm designing every piece that I can uh, to try and make the whole thing coherent. And that's an instinct I've built. I think I've always just been naturally like that, and that design school kind of reinforces that as a process. Um,
Yeah.
but I think it's really just like early life training, teaching people how to sketch, teaching people how to just construct, just to play, with like uh, whatever you have around you, and just make something that makes you feel good, and let that start being more of a guiding force in the world of align surrounding yourself with stuff that actually makes you feel good and not stuff that is either superficial and just kind of looks good, or somebody else has told you is what you're supposed to have, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And working with your hands, I feel like is also something that's is so important. Like not just like, let's say, like thinking about beauty, or perhaps even like making something in it. Like you could say, okay, I'm making digital art, but it has a different experience than actually being, having something in your hand, and also the slowness of it, where you notice way more details and you are actually way more in the moment. You don't have any ways to hack or use an AI to help you do something quicker or whatever like that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I mean, for me, it's been learning how to listen to my body. Uh, and like a lot of the reasons why I didn't go into the architecture field, directly, um, was because I was going to be spending 12 hours a day, 6 days a week on a laptop. And it was allowing me to dissociate to a space where I was just becoming a little bit of an insane person. And so building things and making them with my hands has really been the solution to that, because you have to be in your body when you're doing these things. Especially if you're using like power tools, right? Like you should not be dissociating while you're running a table saw. Um, it doesn't end well. Um, and so, but I think this is when we start breaking into that like consciousness thing, because I think this is the foundation of these meditation movements. I know you do a lot of breath work, right? Um,
Yeah,
it,
and meditation as
yeah,
well.
these systems.
Want to do more than I'm doing
Yeah,
still, but yeah.
fair enough. But yeah, like really bringing ourselves back into our bodies and really feeling what we need, because I think we've gotten really caught up in thinking we can think what we need, and I don't know that that's the best path forward. I think it's your body is going to be the one that's really going to guide you towards health and beauty and truth and all of these things.
Yes, I fully agree. And like, I think thinking in let's say a big part of our society, at least, and especially if you're by the traditional measurements are deemed intelligent, there's a lot of praise for working with your head, but by doing that, it's really easy to forget all these other parts of yourself and of this experience, right? And I've had this myself as well, where I I also was very interested in architecture, funnily enough, when I was younger,
There you go.
and then went into university studying communication sciences, and I just found it way too like it's interesting to analyze and to philosophize about things. I love that, but in the end, I just want to create more, and I want to feel more. I want to lead more from feeling and not from thinking.
Yeah,
And I believe that makes us, if we can lead from the, let's say, the body, from feeling, we have such a richer experience of life, and we will probably create a richer society as well.
yeah, I completely agree. Um, oh, I was gonna bounce off something there, and I've lost it. Uh, well, yeah, we'll go with the body thing. Um, yeah, yeah, I think. Oh, that's what I was gonna say.
There we go.
Working with my hands has made my thinking so much better. Like, returning to my body and returning to feelings, has made me a significantly better thinker, which is kind of the opposite of how we think about that, right? Where generally you imagine the philosopher kind of slowly wasting away in a room somewhere, completely ignoring their body. Um, where I think what actually ends up happening is you need to really embody to be able to understand. Well, yeah, I think I'm kind of repeating myself here, but that's how you discover what's real.
Yeah. 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 And this whole notion of real, like, is such an interesting thing where I feel like there's been a lot of, like in the last years and with the whole rise of AI and this idea of, okay, we can now create simulations that are becoming almost indistinguishable from reality.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, different thinkers are sharing this concept of self-simulation hypothesis, or just a simulation hypothesis, that the idea that we live in a simulation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's becoming more and more evident that there are so many lines we can draw from the simulations that we can create, and what we actually experience in reality. It begs the question, what is real?
Mm-hmm.
And what is this reality even?
Right. Yeah. So I use the kind of the hermetic structure for reality, which is the fire, air, earth, water fundamental elements. And I don't know. I find it useful. I don't know that I think it's more of a strong psychological model than like a true description of reality. But what's useful about it to me is that it describes the world as there's kind of foundational chaos, and like that's the source. The source of everything is nothing, which is kind of this fun paradox that we sit on top of. And then above that is the fire realm, and that's so the first three are all non-physical, and you have the fire realm is kind of desire, impulse, intuition to some extent. Um, Above that is water, which is feelings. I was going to say intuition again. Feelings, emotion.
Yeah.
Um,
Feminine energy,
right.
right? I suppose as
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
Yeah, and definitely traditionally gets laid out as fire masculine, water feminine. Um, and then air being kind of the thinking math language level of it, and then earth being the physical, and that's just useful for me because now you have three levels of stuff going on that science doesn't pay any attention to. I mean, it sort of does the air stuff, but it kind of thinks it stops there. And lived experience, we have so much other stuff going on that's before we think about it. And just opening my vision to the fact that there could be stuff going on those levels has really grounded me and has allowed a lot of my experiences to be validated, because you have these intuitional experiences, you have these inspirational experiences that you can't really justify rationally, but they're real, you know. And
Yeah.
I think the danger of this kind of techno future that we're moving into, as simulations are going to be more and more readily available, and I do consider kind of consensus reality to be a simulation of some kind. For again, to use the pen example, like we don't treat the pen as a real object. We treat it as a functional symbol, and that's a simulation. But really getting this training now of being able to return to our centers, as that air and earth space are going to start getting pretty weird, I think.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
I it's also so interesting to me, like this idea. I just saw a clip, I think yesterday or the day before, of a woman speaking to ChatGPT on her phone, and like asking, like, is it actually maybe that we are in an AI in a sense, like in a version of an AI? And it responded back like, yes, that's exactly it. It is not that you are trying to create something that's artificially intelligent within something that is non-artificially intelligent. It's all just intelligence. And it's actually what we're now beginning to create. Like you could say AGI, artificial general intelligence, would be something like something we call in spirituality our higher self. So like a version of us that lives in a higher dimension, that has a different sense, a broader sense of the reality that we're experiencing. I think that's such an interesting concept to me, and it kind of brings back the whole idea of this allegory of the cave from Plato, which is like thousands of years old. I'm really interested, like, what your whole take is on all that. And in the meantime, by the way, I see that my screen is flickering a lot. You probably noticed that, but I'm recording on a different thing as well. So like, that's not you. It won't be in the final thing, but no, it's annoying. I tried to kill it all day. It keeps going back. So sorry for that.
No worries. It's I'm familiar with the joys of technical difficulty. Sometimes you just chase them as far as you can.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I think just to go with this, like, intelligence as a fundamental thing. This is why I sent you, one of the names I sent you is Michael Levin. I don't know if you got a chance to really spend any time with that.
Just a tiny bit. Yeah, just a tiny
bit. He's a really interesting thinker, and he's really grounded in research, which is nice, because then you're like, okay, this guy, he has a lot of support for the positions that he's taking, which helps when you're arguing with somebody about it.
Of course, yeah.
But he has this model, and I don't think it's his model, but he talks a lot about this idea of cognitive light cones. And basically, he thinks of the universe, and sorry, Michael Levin, if this is a terrible summation of your position, but my understanding of it is he thinks of the universe as sort of this series of nested agents, and an agent being an actor in the world, basically. And he doesn't see any limits to this. Obviously, this isn't a thing he can support with evidence, but I saw him in an interview comment that he wouldn't be surprised if it turned out we could do intelligence experiments with weather, and it turns out that we're kind of having this co-creative experience with weather, depending on how we're interacting with it. But the basic idea of the cognitive light cones is that you have an agent which is nested inside a larger agent. And so if you use like bodies in a cell for this, cells in a body.
Yes.
You have all your liver cells, and those organize into a liver. And so now you've got this higher level of cognitive light cone, because the liver has a different understanding of the world, and we'll use understanding very loosely, than those individual cells do. And then you tie the liver and the kidneys and all of your internal organs together, and we end up with the human body. And that has a wildly different experience and agency in the world than any individual organ does. And he sees that kind of this holographic nesting structure basically everywhere. And so I think that's how I think of both the higher self, and if you want to get into deities and God, is that you have these, like, if you take all of the humans as individual actors, and we combine that into one single intelligence, that might be what we call God, because that's the thing that is the summation of all humans.
Or humanity even.
Right. Yeah. But then there would be one for ants, and there's one for trees, and there's one for the entire planet. But at the same time, there's nested ones. So there's all of this one type of tree, and there's all of this other type of tree. So it gets very, very complex, and very interesting, I think. And so then if we start seeing sort of an AGI structure start to arrive, I think that's probably going to be the healthiest way to think about it, is that it's sort of this higher level, higher order intelligence that's sitting on a significantly more complex system than any of us individually, but it's actually not more complex than the higher order intelligence that sits on top of humanity, right? Because that's an
Right.
incredibly complicated intelligence, and we don't have direct access to it in the way that we would in AGI. And who knows, maybe an AGI will come online and it'll be like, oh, I've been talking to your higher order intelligence. It needs you guys to do this thing. I don't know.
So it also brings up this idea of there's all these nests and all these layers. They're all experiencing the same, what we would maybe call base reality, very differently.
Mm-hmm.
So that also makes me think a lot about, like, what is then real? Can we even say that there's such a thing as an objective reality? Is there even are there even facts, or are there just perspectives, facets, parts of the same area, the same surroundings that are similar but never exactly the same?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I will say maybe that tree looks green or that plant looks green, but a particular type of bird will see something very different.
Yeah.
As will an insect. So it's not green by definition, it's just green to me. And it's probably a different tint of green to you.
Yeah.
And that's just so interesting to me. Like, that whole idea of, okay, what is then real, and what is... Do we actually need to have that objective fact reality?
Right.
Because it seems to be something that we've all been striving for, especially in science. Everything needs to be measurable, and we need to say, okay, now this is what it is. But it's not really, I suppose. Then it's only from our point of view. Maybe as humanity, and yeah, sure, we can design a device that will measure something in a certain way, but that's the device will have been designed from our perspective in our 3D world. Maybe there's 27 other dimensions of that same object that we don't see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of my favorite things to do is to point out to people how arbitrary measurements are, because they're really arbitrary. Like, one of my favorite fun facts is there's a lead block in Paris that is the ultimate reference for the kilogram, but it was made in the late, I'm going to get the date wrong, I think it was made in the late 1800s, with a lead that's not particularly stable. It was the stablest thing they had at the time, but in the last 150 years, it's dropped enough atoms that it's now measurably different than previous calibrations to it. So there's this whole argument of, well, do we remake it in a stabler construction and then use one of these previous calibrations as our reference point for that? Or do we just continue to let this thing slowly decay and we just continually update our calibrations, and who cares? Because it doesn't actually matter. It just needs to, because I think a kilogram is some crazy, I think the definition is something crazy like it's this element at a meter cubed. Like, they were just like, okay.
Right, yeah, it has to come from something. Yeah.
So it's just a decision that people made, and it's important that we stay consistent about it moving forward. But it's not real. in that sense.
No, true.
Um, and yeah, it's pretty mind bendy to start really thinking about the consequences of that. Um, I mean, I'd be willing to say I don't think basically, or I see opportunity that any of the fundamental forces that we've identified for a creature with a different like physical structure than us, they might have come up with totally different fundamental forces because they're being affected by the world differently. And so they're going to find those stabilities in different places. Um, maybe. I mean, those might be entities that we never interact with because they're living in such a different thing.
Right.
Um,
A bird might not have the same idea or give the same importance to gravity that we will, for
right.
example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you said you're pretty familiar with Donald Hoffman. Uh,
Yes.
but I think that's a really important kind of brainworm to have, is this idea that evolution isn't pointing us towards what's real, it's pointing us towards what's useful. And so we're really living in this kind of overlaid operating system on top of reality that, I mean, he says there's a 0% chance that it has anything to do with ground reality, right? Like, yeah,
0%.
yeah,
Yes.
which is a dramatic claim.
Yeah, but he gave this really interesting example. One of the things that I heard him say was like, there's this particular type of beetle that's I think somewhere in the US or Mexico that the male is flies and is smaller than the female, and the female has a particular color of brown and a particular way of it looks in the light. Um, and that are apparently all that the male beetles need to figure out, okay, that's a female beetle and that's what I need to mate with, and not with any other beetle or not even any other thing. Until there were some people in that area in the last couple of decades that started drinking certain kind of drinks, maybe beers, and there were these brown glasses that they left just like threw on the ground, and they left there, and these beetles all of a sudden mistake these brown glass bottles for female beetles, which is preposterous, obviously, from our point of view.
Yeah.
But so it's like, but the only things that the beetles needed to make sure that they would procreate and that the species would survive was it needs to be brown, it needs to be shiny, and it needs to be bigger is better, something like that. So obviously a bottle is bigger than a female beetle. So they would actually, like, while making full physical contact with the bottle, they would still identify it for a female, and it would try to like procreate with the bottle. And if they wouldn't remove the bottles, they would actually, the whole population would die out. So it's so crazy to think like, okay, all that evolution gave these animals was the absolute minimum necessary to procreate. So it's a very efficient system until something happens that kind of fucks it up.
Right. Yeah. I think it's really interesting because a lot of the kind of mainstream descriptions of evolution, really, I think really miss the mark of how evolution probably works. Because I kind of had that moment a while back that I was like, oh, it's not about, evolution isn't survival of the fittest. It's survival of the most efficient. Absolutely. Like whoever's getting away with the least amount of action with the most amount of results is absolutely going to win.
Yes.
And I have a couple things I want to say, so I'm trying to decide how I want to do this. I'll finish that thought. And so and then I started to look at sort of cybernetics and the Donald Hoffman kind of computational neuroscience stuff. And one of the things that those systems are really starting to discover, and then Michael Levin too, this idea of intelligence being everywhere in the system, you start to realize that evolution is actually, even though we classically have called it dumb and blind is actually a very intelligent system, right? Because it's just a feedback loop between every biological agent on the planet and
Mhm.
non-biological, actually, because you got beetles trying to mate with beer bottles. Uh,
Yeah, exactly. The beer models might not try to
right.
procreate, but they are in contact with something else. Yeah,
Yeah. And it's also really interesting to think about how much of that are we doing as a species, right? Where um, especially as we're exploring these new technological spaces, like how much how many of us are
dude, so
right?
much. Even just the concept of money, right? Like, just money is
Yeah, actually.
dead by that definition. It's not biological,
Hmm.
but not organic. But we definitely need money to survive.
Right. Yeah, and how many people get stuck in the money capture game rather than the living their life game, you know? Um, which
Yeah,
I think that's probably a great correlation to sort of this crossing signal thing where you think you're moving towards survival, but really you're kind of isolating yourself in the system. Um, so I wanted to circle back a little bit too, talking about how do we navigate if we don't have direct access to reality. And
yeah,
that's kind of my beauty claim too, is that this is a non-literal signal from the environment that you're moving in a good direction. Um, so it's not like it's it's not the same as kind of the very direct signals of, say, you meet a potential mate and you get all of the pheromone signals and you're like, ooh, this would be a good person to have a baby with. Like that's the very direct version, and we often call that beauty, right? Um, you come home and tell your parents about the beautiful person you met at the bar. Um, but I think it happens on much deeper levels too, and you see it in math and idea spaces a lot. People will describe an idea or a mathematical formula as beautiful, and then it turns out to be incredibly useful as well. Um,
yeah.
the example I'm
So, what is it in that case? It's something has to do with like elegance
Mhm.
or a combination, perhaps, of efficiency, but also doing more than just what it needs to do.
Yeah, I think efficiency is probably a good way to think about it. Again, um, if the real winners of evolution are minimal effort, maximum output, that's probably a lot of what beauty ends up being, right? Is like this very efficient while still being robust. And I think there's one of my big influences that I did not send you in my list of 30 names
Yeah.
uh, was there's a guy named John Vervaeke who's a neuroscientist and thinker out of Toronto, I think. Uh,
I've heard his name, but I haven't dove into his stuff. So
it's beefy, but he's got a YouTube series called Awakening and the Meaning Crisis, um, where he really does a wonderful job of framing neuroscience and kind of spiritual traditions. Um, it's I think it's really good. Um,
interesting. Yeah.
and he talks about how the brain, um, when it's developing neural pathways, it's constantly balancing between what he calls efficiency and robustness. And so efficiency is you're kind of maximizing connections and you're trying to get, and so you can make these more extreme um, jumps. So like if I can get from
Hmm.
here to here in one move instead of 6 moves, that's more efficient. So your brain kind of does this outward growth of it. It kind of fires a bunch of its neural pathways, and in that process, it tries to create new, shorter pathways. But then it goes into this contracted state, and it reinforces the pathways that are made. So you get this like robustness move where it's rebuilding on the foundations that it knows are good. And so you're always balancing between this like reinforcing what you know what works while experimenting and reaching out and trying to make new connections. And I think if I was going to like really define beauty, I would put it's the balance of those two, right? It's the space where you have incredibly efficient connections while not being, because the danger of being too efficient is that um, you can fall apart super easily, right? Uh,
Well, and I would also say like it can get boring in a sense. Like for example, okay, I can make, I don't know, let's take an example of in my city there's an absolutely gorgeous old mailbox,
okay.
like beautifully decorated from cast iron, like different colors of paint. It's amazing. And it's like 150 years old or something.
Cool.
But then everything they make now is just like as efficient as possible.
Right.
Like it's plastic, it's completely square, but that's not beautiful anymore.
Right. Yeah.
So there's a big difference there still.
Mm-hmm. And I think like the COVID, what's the word? What do we call these? The distribution channels, like how efficient but non-robust those were. Like as soon as there was disruption, this whole thing kind of fell apart for a couple weeks, right? And
Yeah.
nobody could get toilet paper. So that's the danger of efficiency, is that you overreach and you're spread too thin. It's, I think, kind of neurologically, it probably looks a lot like sort of schizophrenia or hypermania, where you're just making all of these connections all of the time and you can never be where you are. And at the same time, if you're too robust, if you're too stagnant, then there's just as much danger there, because then the environment changes on you and you get left behind. Like if the water's right, well, yeah, it's like the frog in the boiling water thing, right? Like if you just turn the boiling water up slowly enough, the frog won't notice. But
yeah, you a while ago you said you wanted to have there's a couple of things you wanted to. Have you touched on all of them, or is there still something?
Yeah, that beauty of navigating what's real was the thing I wanted to make sure I came back to.
Yeah. What I'm also interested, like talking about Donald Hoffman, like what I think is so interesting on his take, looking at, going back to this idea of like reality, and is there like living and what we talked about before as well, like living and non-living objects. Is there actually a difference? He said like it's not a distinction, but it's an artifact of the limitations of the headset. And by headset, he meant our perception of being by being human, our perception of the world.
Right.
From the perspective of a human body.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
so. Like, we tend to think that, for example, a stone is a rock is not conscious, and you are like an animal or a human is conscious, but then, well, what are we all in? So if we're all in, let's say that the construction of the construct of this reality, like what some people call dark matter, or the black matter or whatever, like, what if that's actually consciousness? And what if our experience of that version of consciousness is maybe it's just code, and then maybe it doesn't matter if it's a rock or a human or whatever. It's to me that's such an interesting thing. I'm curious what you think about that whole idea of like this perspective of a headset. And
I almost expect that like our biological living versus dead distinctions are kind of a scale issue, where like we live at this level of kind of meters, feet, miles, right? And the universe is very big, very much bigger and very much smaller. And they almost just feel like artifacts of living at kind of this like object scale.
Hmm.
Because like if you go all the way down, right, it's quantum soup. Um, there's no distinction below chemistry, and even chemistry is a pretty like there's the difference between living and organic and inorganic chemistry is I don't know a lot about chemistry. I know those are different disciplines. I'm not entirely sure what the distinctions are there, but if you go down another level, you're in pure physics, um, and there's definitely no distinction. And then you go all the way out, and if we could look at the universe as a whole, um, I'm sure it looks a lot more like. Well, I'm sure you've seen the images of the intergalactic. What do they call it? I think they call it the intergalactic network, and it's this like infrared vision of a bunch of galaxies, and it just looks like neural pathways, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah,
Amazing.
it's also gorgeous. Like people should go look at it just because it's pretty. Um, and so there's I think so a big influence on this for me recently is a guy named Bertrand Russell, who's a philosopher, kind of from the William James pragmatist tradition, and uh, I'm going to be hobbling several people's worth of stuff together here. But he talks about, well, I guess William James actually talks about the ground of the universe as being experience, which I think kind of in modern parlance, we would call it consciousness. Um,
Hmm.
and the idea that like the subjective and the objective are just opposite ends of the spectrum of what we call experience. And I kind of that just feels right to me in a way. And I actually prefer the label experience because consciousness kind of comes with a lot of different baggage where um, pure experience, like we can imagine an object. I think it's you can imagine an object having a history, and so experience kind of makes more sense. Rather, where like consciousness kind of implies agency that it may or may not have. Like rocks probably aren't choosing how they fall down hills.
Yeah,
You know,
true. Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's definitely a matter of definition
right?
there as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and so just kind of instinctively, I prefer the experience label. Um, and I was gonna say I'm gonna assume that you might like this story. Um, one of the things that really opened me up to this was I was listening to trip stories from there's a hallucinogen that people were buying on Amazon for a while, and I'm not gonna remember what it's called. Um, but it's like it's a leaf that you smoke, and it's this huge it really just like knocks you out of your body. You it's people it doesn't seem to be particularly pleasant. Uh, but it
Oh, it doesn't sound like
yeah,
it.
I, it's a dissociative is what I was trying to come up with.
All right.
Um,
Yeah.
and it just got popular because there was this weird confluence of it was available on the internet, and like there was kind of this trend on early YouTube where people were posting videos of people taking this because then they like sleepwalk and stuff. Like their body will move around and then they'll come back and be like, "What happened?" Um, but one of the trip stories I heard was a guy was like, "Yeah, I smoked this stuff and then I was a rock for a million years." And for some reason, that just really opened me to this idea that like rocks experience. Because if you can go imagine yourself being a rock for a million years, that that implies
Yeah.
to me that there's potential for experience there.
Yeah. Have you ever heard about or looked at the work of Dolores Cannon?
I don't think so.
Okay. She she's passed away a couple of years ago, but she's made it a complete life work for I think 40 or 50 years of working with a particular type of therapy that she developed called quantum healing hypnosis therapy.
Okay.
Where this kind of originated by mistake, or you could say, like she wasn't intending to find this, but she was like, I think she was just normally trained as a therapist, and she was working with people and like on the subconscious level and a different kind of techniques, and then working with some versions of trance, and eventually I think a version of hypnosis, but not in the sense where we might know from TV or like, oh, I can make you now do this or do that, but in a sense of hypnosis in that sense means you're going into a certain type of brainwave and you can access the subconscious because you are no longer, your conscious mind is no longer filtering everything, but you are able to, to be talked to and to express. So what she eventually figured out in her decades of work, she's written a lot of books about this, and all the thousands of sessions she's done, is that people started to share in these sessions first about, like, as she was asking about traumas and things just to help them in her practice. They were sharing more and more about previous lives and previous experiences, not just as humans, but as another entity on another planet, or as an animal, or even as a rock, or even as an element, as the air.
Oh, cool.
But with a lot of vivid like details. And first she thought I'm crazy, but this kept happening more and more and more, to the point that I think she's written about 10 books about all this. And there's like, all over the world, people are being trained to, or can you can get yourself trained as a QHST therapist. So it's such an interesting thing of like, well, actually, maybe it is possible to experience a million years of being a rock. Right. It just would look very different. And perhaps your experience of time is also very different.
I would assume. Because, you're being a rock, you're not moving around a lot. So the day goes by a little bit faster. You'd like to hope, anyways, I guess.
Definitely. Feels like being trapped for a long time. But I mean, you have a lot of time to just contemplate and meditate, I suppose.
Right.
But that's probably not your experience you would have as a rock, right? It's probably way more like just observant, or maybe not even that. It's we're getting really trippy here, but
right. No, it's I mean, if I'm going to use kind of the hermetic structure filter, a rock is pure earth, right? So there's no thinking, there's no feeling, and there's no impulse. So somehow just a pure existing, which is a really interesting thing to try and like wrap your head around.
Yeah, that's what some of us try to get towards when we're meditating, but it's probably not ever going to be fully achieved in a human body. Right.
Yeah, I think it's probably worth pushing your ways out, but you don't want to convince yourself you're a rock.
No, and at some point you will need to eat again, and you will need to come out of that state again. Yeah.
I'll have to. Oh, actually, I'll give you because I definitely am on board with reincarnation and stuff. And I have the feeling that it's more of like a harmonic thing, where it's not like. There's probably a through line and stuff for souls, because I kind of assume we have souls, because there's some kind of
well, we are souls, I suppose.
Yeah,
that would be my way of putting it.
Do it with what?
That we are souls, not that we have souls. We are souls and we have a body instead of the other way around.
Yeah, I think that feels very true. And so I wonder. I mean, we kind of know that like linear time is just a result of being in these bodies, right? Like we exist, and like Kant kind of logically proved this in like 1760 or something. Like he opens Critique of Pure Reason with just like, hey guys, by the way, space and time have to just be results of our perceptual experience. They're not real. Which is kind of a fun thing to just have in a book from that period.
Yeah.
But so I imagine that like reincarnation is less of this, like past life has always felt like kind of a idea trap around it for me, where it's like, I don't know that it's necessarily that you've had like these, like this idea that like you've had past lives, right? Like, I don't know that that's the best way to think about it, as so much as like experience is available all of the time. And our soul might just be sort of this like receiver of experience that can bounce around. And there are states we're experiencing in this life that then like we tune into stuff that looks like a previous life or something, but it's really more about like a harmonic patch happening, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. It's also interesting, like, because our, like you said, like our perception of time dictates what we believe of time, but it doesn't mean that that's reality. Like, it could be that, like a lot of mystics have said for a long time, like there's only the now, and the past and the future only exist in our imagination. Like when we have memories of the past, but when they were happening, they were the now, and we have ideas of the future, and maybe those things will happen, but when they are happening, it will be the now again.
Right.
So like there's only really the internal now. And from that sense, if you also accept the idea that there's multiple dimensions or multiple layers of a similar experience or same reality, or maybe not reality, but experience, then it could also be that the same soul has different lives at the same time on different levels of experience.
Yeah, I
mean, by definition, it has to be, if there's only the now, right, then there is not really any time, right? And by definition, anything that happens at the same time.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Just a neuroscience comment on that. Like, we think of our brains as hard drives, and that's not really good when it comes to memories, because we actually generate memories, right? Like, if you remember something, you're actually remembering the last time you remembered it. So it's not that.
Wait, what?
So the idea is memories aren't stored in your head somewhere. There's an associative structure that you access, and it's actually like it's a brain state. It's not like.
Yeah, I agree with that. But then, so like we are a receiver, an antenna to a certain frequency of information that we tap into. But then when we have a memory, we have a memory of a memory, or like we kind of recreate that. We recreate that experience in the moment from information,
Right?
But not from the thing that happened actually.
Right.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah. So your memories are actually very malleable, because you reconstruct it every time. Like every time you recall something, you're actively reconstructing it rather than retrieving something. If that makes
yeah.
And so it's one of these weird things where like we also think of reality as continuous because we kind of experience it that way. But there's a bunch of memory research that's just like, oh yeah, the more confident you are about a memory, generally the more wrong you are. So there's all sorts of weird traps in this thing.
I like that. I mean, there's this very old wisdom of like, the more I know that I don't know anything at all, right?
Yeah.
Or a version of that. I might be butchering it a little bit, but like that's this whole idea of what I also Um, God, I have to look this up because I wrote this down. It was so interesting. This idea of that we all believe that our perception, our unique perception, is reality.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as we identify with that, we will always fight other people because their perception is different. So we're going to be fighting about what we believe is reality. But actually, we just have to accept that we have different perceptions
Mm-hmm.
and different perspectives of a similar experience, but we don't have the same experience of that experience,
Right.
of that happening. Perhaps that's maybe a better word than experience, even like what Alan Watts says, like everything is just a happening.
Mm-hmm.
And we all have experiences of the happening. So like this whole idea of that there is not, in this happening, there are not facts, only experience, makes it really hard to agree
Mm-hmm.
on some stuff, perhaps. And that's, I feel like, something that we may have to learn to let go over the next decades.
Right.
But it gives a lot more, I would say, peace, and it'll, with just being with what is, and also we don't, like, it seems like now we're fighting so much against each other,
Mm-hmm.
and also against reality. Like we try to make it different. Oh, this is my experience. This is not the experience I want to have,
Mm-hmm.
but this is the one that you're having, and you're having it because of what you've experienced in the past, and in that sense, how you have programmed yourself, or how you have been programmed by your experiences before. So that whole notion of, yeah, there is one fact about a certain thing, and we have to all agree on that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's if that's really going to help us.
Right. Yeah. I go back to like measurement for this, where like you have this kilogram, and it's really important that if we're going to work together, we have to agree that that's a kilogram, right? Because if you go use a different kilogram than I do, and then we come together to do something, our calibrations are going to be different. I'm going to drop your thing, you're going to drop my thing, whatever.
Yeah.
And so there's great utility in facts and measurements and that level of like I like lowercase truth, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
But I'm going to return back to the Michael Levin cognitive cone thing, where a pancreas cell and a liver cell are going to very, very much disagree on what reality is, right? But they're both part of our bodies, and they're both working collectively to keep us alive. And so, yeah, getting okay with disagreement, and not even being able to understand, because we kind of also are telling ourselves at this point, like, oh, just be empathetic, just put yourself in their shoes and you'll understand. And it's like, I think sometimes you just won't, because
No, you won't. I agree.
'cause-
Yeah. You don't have to.
yeah,
Also.
because if they're a different function than you, then you just won't get it. And I like the way Michael Levin thinks about cancer, because he's got this model that basically what's happening with cancer is that individual cells have lost their um yeah, they've lost their energetic connection to the rest of the body. So like you have a pancreas cell that doesn't know it's in a pancreas, so it just thinks it's a lone cell in an open field, and a single cell in a room with resources is going to just replicate, right? So
Yeah.
so the runaway kind of growth we see in cancer is cells that don't know they're part of a larger system. And that just feels like a really good metaphor for where we are right now as a species, is like we have kind of all of these like cancerous tumors of groups who don't understand that we're all in this thing together. And we're really splintering ourselves in not agreeing that like we're all humans and we have some kind of shared goal because of that.
Yeah, and we are so much more alike than
Right.
different. Zach Bush talks a lot about this as well. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. I think he's really interesting.
I'm sure I've heard some stuff from him.
Yeah, he calls this the separation conflict. So like, and he also talks about cancer cells, and he's actually done a lot of research as a, I think, board certified doctor, working a lot with patients and figuring all this stuff out. And actually he's seen in his labs, which is really interesting to me, that yes, cancer cells they're disconnected, and because of that they're multiplying.
Mm-hmm.
And that tends to have a bad effect on the body as a whole. Yet we have this thing in our bodies. Our body's made up of DNA structure, right? And it's a double helix, so it's this double structure that's twisting and turtling. But there's a lot of ideas about that. Actually, we have more, let's say, dormant DNA, or that originally we are supposed to have 4 strings, or maybe 12 or 24 even, and not 2.
Okay.
And he's actually seen in his lab 4-stranded human DNA,
Okay.
but only in cancer cells.
Okay.
Because they are disconnected from the entire system energetically, thus they are not being told what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And they are not being, in a way, held down by the belief that we have of what we're supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
Which is really interesting to me. So like, we are actually the brakes of our own evolution, in a sense. Mm-hmm. Our consciousness and what we have created over the hundreds of thousands of years and generations on generations of this whole idea of all the trauma that we've endured, and all, both on a level of the species as on an individual level, has tainted our belief of who we are and what we can do so much that we are now actually withholding ourselves from going into the full potential that nature wants to go to when it's disconnected.
Right. Yeah, and I think, I mean, there's some levels there, right? Because like, if we did, I have no idea what the consequences would be if we transitioned into a 4-strand DNA structure. I imagine we would not be. I imagine that would be a pretty significant like form change, right?
I think so. Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot of reluctance because it would just be so different, right? Like we do really have a hard time with very dramatic change. And I wonder too, like, I mean, maybe you see that in cancer, but like, is that better? I don't know. Like maybe.
No, obviously not. Right. I mean, it's destroying people's bodies.
So maybe the 2 helix thing that's actually where you need to be, because otherwise your growth rates are too fast and you can't maintain a body,
Yeah.
Like I think a lot of nature seems to be these balances of like potentials and then guardrails, I guess. And we're always living in this, and I think that's the same thing as like past future, right? Like we're always living in this very like compressed thing where it seems like there's stuff on either side, but we're really not trapped, but we're really just living right here. And it's interesting to start to like, I mean, I think what's so wonderful about meditation is you get to really just like settle into that. And like, now it's not about changing. Now it's not about trying to get somewhere, trying to get better. It's just about that Alan Watts thing you said, like you're just settling into the happening.
What has been your experience with meditation and just with, let's say, a spiritual awakening as a whole? I'm really curious.
Yeah. So I always identified as spiritual, but I grew up Christian. and then kind of did the classic logical teenage boy thing where I got pretty existential, nihilistic. Um,
Yeah, same here.
yeah, uh, and actually, what broke me out of it was going to the Vatican in Rome, and I saw St. Peter's, and just walked into this monster of a building, and I'd gone, imagining that like kind of the modernist aesthetic is the best thing to do, and then I walk into this incredibly ornate classical building and just had my socks knocked off. Um, and it really, like, in a very direct way, it just made me reappreciate that, like, God is definitely real, you know, and which then led to several years of deep seeking, because I don't I never figured out a way to kind of reconcile the scientific materialist position with that.
Mm.
And a lot of battling between my thinking brain and my body, and knowing what I felt was real and not having a good structure for it. And meditation was really, I kind of did guided meditation listening to Ram Dass lectures for a really long time.
Amazing. Yeah.
Like 2 years of several hours a day, probably.
Wow.
Um,
Oh, wow. That's dedication. Love that,
well,
man.
I had the advantage of, I was living in a very cheap situation, and I had some savings, so I didn't have to work a lot. Um, so I was kind of able to really hermit. Um, and I don't know that it was the most. I wouldn't recommend it to people. Is what I would say. um, it got a little weird. Uh, but then that opened me to kind of these other philosophical ways of knowing, and kind of through yoga, and then, and actually, I don't know if you've ever seen this, but there's a show on Netflix called Midnight Gospel. By
No, haven't seen it.
it's animated excerpts from a podcast by Duncan Trussell, but he's talking to all these like spiritual thinkers, and he has this conversation with the occultist Damien Eccles, and he talks about having this. He did this very deep Zen Buddhism training, and then got into Western occultism, and says, I got more out of 6 months in this occult tradition than I did out of the Buddhism tradition. I think simply because it's the symbol set that I grew up with. Um, and so
Yeah.
that was kind of a good sell for me. So I started digging into that stuff. And now I live somewhere in kind of a Neoplatonist, Gnostic, alchemical space. Um, and making stuff. You kind of have to believe in magic, I think, once you start making stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, man, I fully agree. Like I'm really looking forward to work more with my hands, make physical stuff as well. But like I've been a filmmaker and photographer for about 13 years now professionally.
Nice.
So like in that sense, I'm making a lot,
Hmm.
but it's still different. And obviously, I'm also physically doing stuff. Like I mean, I'm not only behind a computer. Thank God, I'm also like with a camera in the field and running and creating and thinking about like concepts and metaphors and all this kind of stuff. It's There's been moments that I'm sure you'll recognize when you're creating where something new arises from that happening, from that creation, it's impossible to predict, it's impossible to recreate, and it's impossible to quantify why exactly it touches you, but it does.
Yeah.
And that to me is magic.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's I mean, that's right in that beauty space for me too, where it's like, this is a true thing that was completely unpredictable. We can't, you can't bottle it. You can't do anything with it, but it's just a result of interacting with the world and engaging honestly, I think is a big part of it. Like, it's easy to go do stuff and just kind of run a formula and you'll get results. But that really engaging, and I think like creative work is great for this because nobody has a good formula for making art, right? Like,
Hmm.
people kind of land in their habits or whatever, but
Right, and then it becomes a formula, but then it becomes repetitive, and it's not necessarily art every time
right.
again. The first time it was art, and then it becomes like repetition.
Hmm. There's a there's a really fun book that Salvador Dali wrote, and it's
Oh,
Salvador Dali, so who knows how serious this is. But he wrote this whole prescriptive um, trance uh, ritual to that he claims he did with his paintings, and it's all of this crazy stuff. Like, you wake up at 4 a.m., you go get a sea urchin from the sea, you eat that, then you like, or what, you like eat just the left side of it, kind of thing. Like, it's just totally ridiculous. But it also has all of these, like, there's also like sleep deprivation involved, and I think um, Einstein did this too, where like he would take a nap in a chair holding a ball bearing, and then when that as he's falling asleep, the ball bearing falls, hits a plate, wakes him up, and then that like liminal space that he was in is where he's like finding all of these ideas.
yeah, that is definitely that's also the place where Joe Dispenza tries to get you in his meditation. It's like this space of in between waking and sleeping, right?
Hmm.
Where your brain is in a way more creative space, but also where you are way more open to make new pathways and integrate new ideas.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
and like that
yeah. Go.
feels um, very deep for the creative process for me, where it's like you're a lot of the goal is stripping out those, again, like functional symbols, right? Like, can I go see this pen as what it is instead of as a pen? And as soon as you start living in that space, you start seeing potentials everywhere. Um,
Yeah. That's a man. That's such a beautiful way of looking at life through that lens of not just taking things for granted for just their, so let's say, minimalistic point of what they're supposed to do, like their usage, but actually look at what they really are.
mhm.
Yeah. Have you written have you read rather Rick Rubin's new book, The Creative
I actually haven't.
Path?
Um, yeah,
It's not The
the
Creative Path. What's it
creative
called?
way, creative act.
The Creative Act.
Yeah,
Yes, a way. The Creative Act, a way of being.
yes. Um, no, I've listened to several of his interviews. Um, honestly, I'm enough of a contrarian that I got it recommended enough that I'm like, I can't read it now. So,
Well, it's just funny because he lays out in one of the chapters, which is fun because all the chapters are really short, so it's a really good thing to read through. You don't have to go from page 1 to page 300 or whatever. Um, he lays out all the ways of different famous artists believed that they needed in order to be creative.
mhm.
So for like the sea urchin kind of thing, there's so many funny
Oh,
examples. So just for that, I suppose you should read it. Not necessarily because it's you have to take it serious,
right.
but there's so much fun in there. And like also these people that say like, look, when I am creative, I have to lean into it. So there was one artist that was like, okay, my wife organized a dinner party with our friends, and there's like 10 people at a big dinner table, and I have an idea, and he's just out of there,
Hmm.
and he's just all evening in his room upstairs just writing or whatever, like that. That's interesting to me, and it's also in a lot of ways how I experience it. Like it comes and goes, and when it's here, you need to grasp it. You need to work with it.
Yeah, I think Jung talks about it as his like, because he talks about his daemon, and I don't remember exactly what the quote is, but it's something like, I would never have chosen this. Like, it sucks because I've got this thing that just shows up and tells me I have to do something. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, because you're, yeah, and I spent a lot of time kind of stuck in the space of like the inspiration would come, and I'd be like, it'll come back, and then I wasn't producing anything because I was constantly pushing off the actual getting up and doing it. And it's really incredible how as soon as you start to ride that wave, it really just, you get a lot of it.
Yeah, it goes. I just had last night where I was like reading some stuff, and then I had all these insights, and
Hmm.
I couldn't sleep,
Yeah.
and I was like writing out all ideas, and I was like, okay, at some point I have to go to bed, and I took my journal with me just in case I
Mm.
have, because obviously when you're late at night, there's always good
Oh
ideas,
yeah.
and then I'm in bed, and I'm like, I'm so excited, like I don't want to sleep, I can't sleep, like it's so, and then I wake up at 4:30,
Hmm.
super awake again with all these ideas. I'm like, wow, it's yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really amazing when you can tap into it.
Yeah. I actually did the same thing. I was awake until 5 a.m. and then had to wake up at 7 to be here. So one of those days, I guess.
Wow,
But
man, amazing. Yeah, you touched shortly on alchemy.
hmm.
Can you elaborate on that? Like, I mean, I have a concept of it,
Hmm.
but like from your point of view, like what is that, and why is it important?
Yeah. Um, I have a very, I got into it via Jung. So I have a very kind of psychological take on it. Um,
Yeah,
but basically, the way I think about it is, so it was the first science for sure, right? Like it was the first um, active experimentation with the physical world in like a intentional way. I think humans are scientists, like fundamentally. Um,
hmm,
but I think it's one of the first times where people really started building a structure around it and really started documenting their results. Um, and but we kind of think of it as this like faux science where people are trying to turn lead into gold, um, and really just a way to like trick kings into uh, funding some guy's weird experiments or whatever. But I think it's really deeply tied into the esoteric Christian mystical traditions. Like it's very
yeah.
much a spiritual practice.
So yeah, so this alchemy idea is obviously it's about something very deep within all of
Hmm.
us.
Yeah, and this like co-creative process that we have with reality. And I think the way I kind of interpret it is that it's a series of techniques that let you that give you feedback both externally and internally. So, because there's all of these like perceptions involved in it, and they tell you like, oh, you'll see this effect once this process has happened. Um,
Huh.
which kind of metaphorically is a lot like the yoga traditions. I mean, they have these. There's, I think the Buddhist traditions are full of. I'm, I don't know this directly, but I've heard stories that like if you're working with a teacher, you come and report experiences, and they'll tell you, oh, that correlates to this stage of your spiritual awakening, and you're starting to move through this thing. So here's stuff to pay attention to. Um, and the alchemy stuff really reads to me similarly to that. On top of like, I think kind of the Western kind of externalizing uh, manipulation of the environment thing was carried into that too, where people were doing physical experiments and then correlating internal states with those.
Yeah.
Um, and then I think that's where kind of the magic starts to come in. It's like, oh, now your internal states have these effects on the physical world, and you start to learn how that manipulation works.
Yes. And what I think so interesting as well, of like, we used to call that magic, but there's this quote, I don't know from who it is, but like, magic is just science that we insufficiently understand, or something like this. Like, and it makes a lot of sense of like, okay, let's say my perception of reality is that everything is connected. We're all connected to this universal field of consciousness. And like we say, like, my brain is not a hard drive. My brain is a receiver and perhaps a transmitter as well, in a sense. And it can tune to a certain frequency, and we all have a unique frequency, and because of that, we all can tap into our unique memories. But actually, some people have a broader spectrum of frequencies, or they're able to tune their frequencies, and in that sense, read your mind. It sounds very crazy when it's like, oh, that's something in their body happening. Right. But when you have the idea of, no, this is actually just information that's available everywhere through the unified field of consciousness, all you have to do is tune your frequency, and all of a sudden something that seems impossible becomes very real. And that is, of course, can be true with a lot of other things as well. And I'm not sure if you've heard about the telepathy tapes, which has been super viral last couple of months. Like, so amazing, so interesting. Like, I would definitely, anyone listening, have listen to the whole thing. It's just mind-boggling what non-speaking autistic kids can do. And it's showing, like, their research into that is proving so many very old, very conceptual, let's say spiritual ideas, like something called the Akashic Records, which is presented or can be described as a sort of library in a different dimension where all information of everything that ever happened is stored. And it sounds kind of preposterous in a sense, if you believe this is, only physical is real and this is our reality, and our brain is in our brains are in our heads, but like our intelligence is in our heads, and all the information is. But if you ponder on this other idea of like, no, actually, it's all out there and we're just receivers, all of a sudden it makes a lot of sense that all this information has to be stored somewhere, or maybe just everywhere at the same time, like a cloud in a sense. And it's so fascinating to me, like this whole idea of, okay, if what we think is reality, if we change that, then everything that we used to believe was impossible, a lot of that actually becomes very logical.
Right. Yeah, it's a really basic kind of conceptual step to allow all of this stuff to be real. And again, that's why I like this kind of hermetic. So this is like the alchemical worldview, is these fundamental elements. And as soon as you're like, oh, well, obviously the physical world is there, but there's these other layers of reality that kind of sit behind it that we do interact with, where like, kind of, it's like time really stops in the water space. So you have like, and this is a thing I kind of intuited. I don't know. It just feels very real to me. Like, I think one of the reasons why like emotions can be so overwhelming is when you're feeling an emotion, you're not just feeling it for the event that has triggered it. You're feeling it every time that it's happened in your life, right? Like, it really connects you
of course,
across your entire timeline. And so it can be brutal. And it's why like grief is so hard, because every time you experience grief, you're really just experiencing all of the grief, right?
But I'm also wondering, like, in my experience, like, if we can alchemize that, what we would maybe describe as a negative experience, for example, grief or pain, whether it's physical physical pain almost always turns into emotional pain.
Right.
if we can alchemize it into something positive, then it takes away at least a part of the load
Mm-hmm.
of that emotion when we're experiencing that same emotion again. So
Right.
like, I believe there's this theory, and I need to dive into this more to really know how this works. But like, all the ways that we react to the base experience, like the base emotions that we have to experiences, all come from our first 7 years
Mm-hmm.
of life and what we experienced there. So, and people can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm happy to learn. It's just something I believe is correct. So let's say, for example, you were abused by your dad. You were hit when you were a kid. Any situation that is similar to where you will feel similar to how you felt in that moment, you will feel all that pain again.
Mm-hmm.
But if you do the work, if you do therapy, if there's all kinds of ways, obviously, to work with this, and it's different for everyone and for every situation, you will eventually at least come to grips, come to maybe even be able to forgive your father. And in that sense, a lot of this energy that's stuck, and because it's stuck, it hurts so much every time it comes up, it can flow again. And it's actually, it doesn't hurt, and you're not taken back to that moment as a kid every single time someone says something mean to you, for example.
Right. Yeah, for me it feels like learning how to identify with that higher order intelligence, right? Because like if you're living, I'll say biographically, like if this moment of you being whatever age you are is the only experience you have, and it's the extent of your identity, then an emotion that ties you into your entire timeline is going to be completely overwhelming, because you're stuck in this version of you when you're experiencing these feelings of every version of you. And so expanding that identity out into all of this lifetime, and then however wide that can get, I assume. I mean, people talk about feeling cosmic intelligences and things.
Yeah.
So I think that expansion can be very significant, and then you have so much more space around like this lifetime's worth of emotions.
Yeah. And there's also this, what I've noticed more and more over the last, let's say, 2 years, of having different experiences of the same happening at the same time. So I can feel a lot of emotion, or actually I can feel a lot of stuff flowing through my body, really, and I tend to identify it as emotion, but really it's just also like tingling sensations, whatever, in my body. And they might be heavy, like I might get really touched by something and I might be very sad in that sense. But then at the same time, I have this feeling of, I'm so glad I can feel all this. I feel so alive. And I actually feel super happy while I'm crying because I'm sad.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting to me how those different levels or dimensions, or however you want to call it, work.
Yeah. And I remember, I was going through a breakup at one point and just sobbing in a car, and at the same time having this kind of removed experience of it, and just being like, and at the time I wasn't as self-compassionate, so there was some judgment about it, and then I kind of just knocked off into a third space and was like, this is super weird that I'm just watching myself be sad. And so it's great to have a framework that tells you that that's not you being an insane person, right? Because kind of traditionally we'd be like, oh, that sounds like schizophrenia or something. When it's,
you would be locked away for the next 20 years.
Yeah, if you tell the wrong person that, they're gonna institutionalize you. But I agree. I think there's real power in being able to be in both spaces, and I think that's It reminds me of like the Jesus quote of being of, oh, what does he say? Um, of the, I don't remember what it is, but basically having one foot in both worlds, right? Like being a person while being a soul. Um,
Right. So being in the world, not of the world,
yeah,
something
I
like
think that's
that.
right.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, and you get to like, because you do have to feel those things, right? Like it's really easy to get caught in kind of like the spiritual bypass space of, oh, I'm this high spiritual being. I don't have to feel anything. Um,
Yeah, that's gonna backfire
right. Yeah.
massively at some
Because you
point.
tend not to,
Yeah.
then you don't know what you're feeling, and that's a whole problem. Oh, actually, one of the things I wanted to bring up, just in terms of like how important the body feedback is, because emotions are just body states, right? Um,
Yeah.
so something in your environment triggers your body into a certain state, and that tells you something directly about the environment, right? And there are trauma structures and stuff that can dilute that, but I think I consider emotions as like that's as close as we get really to like direct feedback from the world around us. Um,
Yeah. Um, I've also heard someone say emotions are the only thing that are actually real.
yeah, yeah, I think there's a lot of truth in that. And there's a book called Descartes' Error, which I don't remember the author of, but he's a neuroscientist and he's doing research into prefrontal cortex damage. And so like the famous one is Phineas Gage, who's the guy who got the railroad rod through his head and it like disconnected his uh
Oh wow, I don't know
okay.
about that one.
He's a very popular story in the psychology spaces because the traditional claim is that he lost his prefrontal cortex, his behavior significantly changes, he was like very responsible um rail line worker, like manager of several teams, super reliable guy. This event happens and he turns into a drunkard and a gambler and basically can't hold a job anymore and he just kind of turns into this transient and fades off into the sunset. And the traditional interpretation is that he lost his prefrontal cortex, so now he's no longer logical. So
Hmm.
he doesn't have any like self control. But this guy's research into similar type of brain damage, um, he tells this story about a guy who has similar brain damage, and he asks him when he wants to have his next session, and this guy spends almost an hour being way too logical about this decision. Like he can't pick what's best because he can come up with an infinite number of reasons why this one's better than this one and this one's better than this one. And the claim in the book is that that's because he doesn't have access to his emotional states anymore. And so he doesn't know what his preferences are. And so he can no longer navigate in the
Ah.
world because he's only logical and he doesn't have access to this grounding emotional state that tells him what's actually going to be better for him. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and that feels like a really fundamental thing to like shift people into.
Yeah, man. And it kind of brings me back to one of the things we said in the very beginning of like how important it is to figure out your own way of interacting with
Mm-hmm.
beauty and knowing what you like, knowing what you want to create, knowing what you want to see more of. Um, so you, well, first of all, will have I believe, a richer experience of life, but also you will actually contribute to more beauty in the world instead
Mm-hmm.
of just consuming what is being presented.
Right. Yeah, or presenting what's easily consumed. Because there's also
Yeah,
like it's an incredibly frustrating problem.
it's a slippery slope that.
Huh?
That's a very slippery slope
Yeah.
where I believe a lot of people, also tied to money, of course,
Hmm.
like where you tend to go. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and like the other option is really hard because you have to do all of this. Like first you have to discover this thing in yourself, and you have to discover how you want to interact with beauty, and then get the technical skills to be able to actually do that. And then you have to spend a bunch of time finding your audience, because you're not going to find mass appeal if you do it that way, right? Because
Mm.
you have to go find your tribe. You have to go find the people who live in the same organ of the human body, right? Because they're the ones who you're going to be able to nourish with this stuff.
Yeah. There's this very famous interview of Rick Rubin where he says, someone asks him, like, how much attention do you pay to the
Mm.
audience? And he says, zero,
Right.
like none at
Yeah.
all. I don't take them into account whatsoever.
Hmm.
Like, that's so fascinating because you will never really find the true you if you start to already adjust or censor yourself from what you believe other people want to see while you're still in the process of like experiencing, exploring yourself.
Right. Yeah.
It's
It's self-defeating, right? Like,
yeah. Yeah. And I would rather, when I'm old and I'm in my final years or whatever, look back on a life where I've lived a life true to
hmm
me and where I have had maybe just an average life, but I've, felt very fulfilled because I've lived the life that I wanted,
hmm
instead of, oh, I believe it's in, for example, money. And because of that, I've kind of, you know, just left my uniqueness and the things that I really wanted to do. I kind of left them like decades ago, and I just chased money. And then at some point I figured out, I learned that, the money isn't it, but now I'm so disconnected from myself, or I'm too old that I can't go back.
right. Yeah.
Seems like a very painful future.
Right. And I want to push back a little bit. You said maybe I look back and see that I just had an average life, but I think if you're choosing the life that excites you, it can't possibly be that, right?
It's the wrong choice,
Yeah.
but I mean, by
No, no,
definition, perhaps, of
it's
when you say
it's the way we talk about it, and it's the way that
right.
it is. The fear is that, oh, if I choose my thing, it won't be exciting. And it's like, no, if you choose your thing, it's going to be the most exciting. Yeah.
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And perhaps even the most successful.
Yeah.
Because I also believe that we are all needed in this massive soup of humanity. Our uniqueness is needed, but we need to bring it out,
Right.
and we need to learn. We need to first figure out what it actually is that is our uniqueness and our unique skills and our unique beauty. And then we need practice
Right.
to actually bring it out. Like the first time I made a video like 15 years ago, it was pretty
Right.
terrible. Now they're getting better, and there will be better in 10 years, like so. And
Mhm.
it's the same with everything. You need to continue to sharpen the blade,
Mhm.
and also like explore and pick up a new blade or a new thing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, again, it's that balance of efficiency and robustness, right? Like efficiency is the exploration, robustness is the sharp blade. And the longer you pursue that, the better it gets, because you can start making these kind of, because so the way I kind of conceptualize my art practice is that I say I'm just knocking dominoes over. Like I'm not involved in the process so much. I kind of set up dominoes, and I'm intentional about that part, and then I just hit it, and I let the thing happen, and then I come in and I tweak it depending on how it ended up. Um, but like being able to predict that outcome better and better, the more interesting stuff I can do, because then I'll have stronger expectations, which then will be really broken when something happens that I didn't expect. And then I have this much wider opportunity to shift and adapt.
Yeah. It's how do you deal with expectations? Because I feel like
Badly.
it's in it in a sense is needed, but it's also, it can be very detrimental to the creative practice, right?
Yeah. So I've been telling, my joke recently has been that I don't make a grocery list because if I go to the store and they don't have what's on my list, I can't handle that failure and I have to just leave. If my expectations are set, and they get broken, I'm useless. So for me, it is becoming more and more about setting direction and having intention in the sense of I know how I want to show up, but really trying to keep that boundary around expecting definitely around the outcome and around how other people or other things are going to show up, like really maintaining that space around what I actually have control over. And I've been very bad at it. I'm getting better purely through misery.
It's a challenging process, right? But I think what you just touched on, like that, I felt like the same, like to focus more on the process than on the end result. That is a game changer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and specifically, I think in that way of like, I know what I'm trying to do, and so that's the thing I can fulfill, and kind of letting and being open to changes, because that's also when the magic does happen, right? Like, and I think meditation and kind of magical practice has been the most useful for this stuff, because like magic doesn't work if you have rules about how it's supposed to show up for you, right? Like all you can do with magic,
right,
give it space, and then the miracle happens because you gave it the room for the miracle to happen.
Right, exactly. And that's the same with manifestation, which is very tied to that, I suppose. Like you can have an idea of what you want, but not about how you're supposed to get it.
Right.
Because you can have one idea, but there's literally infinite ways that this new reality can come towards you. Yep. And if you are very focused on that one thing, you're going to block everything else.
Right. And
right. So if you're doing it the wrong way, you're actually stopping the process instead of helping it.
Right. And my correction mechanism for this is always we've got like a grapefruit sized bit of electric jello in our heads that can decide how stuff's supposed to happen. And so it's just going to be wrong, you know? Like it can't handle the complexity of the world around it.
I believe there was Jung that had this quote of the ego is, oh God, what is it? The ego is like a cork bobbing up and down in the ocean or something.
Mm-hmm.
So like we think we have it so right, while actually we don't have any control at all.
Right. Yeah. And I have a friend who has a character who says, humans have this funny word, try. And we're constantly putting an effort, and for no good reason, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's I don't have anything to add. Yes.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, I mean, look, man, I think that's probably also a good way to end. Like, I do want to really give you a chance if there's anything else you want to share or dive into. Like, mm-hmm. I mean, I've been enjoying this conversation so much.
Yeah, me too.
Like, I'm happy to go on longer, but I don't have any particular questions anymore. If there's anything you want to share, go ahead.
I think we've hit all the big boxes that I was hoping to. So, I'm feeling really good about it.
Amazing.
Thank you so much for reaching out. This has been a really good time.
Yeah, for me as well. Thanks so much for saying yes and showing up. And if there's any places that you want to point people to, your art or anything else, I will link them in the show notes as well. But if you want to share something about them, please, I'm happy to hear.
Yeah, the only real online presence I have is on Instagram, so it's andrewj.studios. And then that has access to any future projects I might start. So
amazing. All right. Thanks so much, Andrew. And to everyone listening, I hope you really enjoyed this, all the different tangents and ways that we went, and hope there's a lot in there for you to play with and be inspired by. And I'm very happy to see you again next week. Thank you.
Thank you much.
Thanks for watching or listening to the Spirit Unfolding podcast. I'm so grateful that you've joined us in this episode, and I hope that you've gained valuable insights and inspiration that you can apply to your own life. If you enjoyed the episode, please share it with your family, friends, and on social media. And subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts so we can reach more people and bring on bigger guests. Thank you, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.